evening, everyone. Welcome to this celebration of the life of Thomas Sankara, who was assassinated 30 years ago tomorrow, October 15th. We've always had great relationship with the organization that Ameth leads, the Group for the Liberation, how is it again? Guerrilla. I can't remember the exact meaning of the acronym, but it's related to the liberation of Africa. And with that, I'm going to pass you on to Ameth and let him take over for organizing.
Greetings, everyone. I will start by saying thank you for everyone who have taken time to come here to commemorate with us this very important date, October 15, because it's a date that represents a lot for people of African descent all over the world, but also for progressive people who are interested in looking at the experiences that were going on in Burkina Faso between 1984 and 1987. We would like this event today to be more like a dialogue, so that's why we don't have really a panel for presentation and long speeches. The title of the event is called 30 Years After Sankara, Which Way Forward for Africa and the Caribbean. If you want to reflect around those lines, it's very interesting for us, I believe, to engage in dialogue and have some type of brainstorming and discuss what are the options going forward and what are the alternatives to the situation we are living today. Whether it is in African continent or in the Caribbean, because we do believe that people of African descent have some common basis under which their operation is being organized right now, and we believe that there is a possibility to tackle some of the structural issues that African people face, whether it is in the African continent or in the Black diaspora. This will be happening in the context also of a global world where we understand that we are not alone in this world, and there are struggles going on in Latin America, in Asia, and that it is important to understand also those connections with other people around the world who are not African but who are engaged in struggle for social transformation. Roughly, that's the 2 points that we would like to put on the table today for discussion. For those who are not very familiar with Thomas Sankara, he came to power in Burkina Faso in 1984. Burkina Faso being a small landlocked country in West Africa. He was part of the military, but through a long period of time had worked very closely with the civil society organizations that were engaged in political movement. So we have this situation in Burkina Faso where we have the army that was very closely linked to trade unions and political parties, most of them that were at that time considered as Marxist-Leninist parties, and that connection created the condition for a lot of young people within the army to be politicized and develop their political consciousness, which later on erupted into this revolution that took place between 1984 and 87. Now, this year is very important because it's happening in the context where we celebrate the 100th year of the Russian Revolution. We are not going to go into that in detail because everybody can have their own judgment of what happened to that process, how it was attempted to be applied in different parts of the world, but we can all agree that it was a major event in world history. So today, in 2017, that we are celebrating this commemoration is happening within the context of a 100th anniversary. It's happening also in the context of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Che Guevara. And Thomas Sankara was always presented by a lot of people, even though I don't like that much, a lot of comparison, but as the Che Guevara of Africa, or Che was maybe the Thomas Sankara of Latin America. Che have very deep connection with Africa, in a sense that I have a book here that you can show it in the middle, which is the Che in the Congo in the middle. It means that he was at one point he was in Congo and trying to organize and help people in the Congo launch some national process movement after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. That process was not very successful, and it's after that process that he came and then went on later on to Bolivia, where he was murdered 50 years ago. Before that also, he had some connection with people in the national liberation movement of the former Portuguese colonies in Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, movement that was led at the time by Ameth Cabral. So all these events are happening, and then I would like us to start with the starting point to break away from a myth that Africa, nothing is happening there. That's negative images, because that's what we see in the media. When we don't follow very closely the movements that are happening inside Africa, we tend to see sometimes that we believe that, oh, how come these conditions are so rough in the center of the continent? You have civil wars, of course. Sometimes you have people trying to reach Europe through Libya and Italy to try to migrate. And if those images are the only ones that are transmitted through the mass media, people easily can fall into some type of pessimism and believing that nothing critical or important is happening inside the continent, which is not the case. A few years ago, a process of revolt started in Tunisia with a young man who set himself on fire to protest because he was just a young, educated Tunisian with a master's degree in his pocket, and he couldn't find a job. He was trying to go from market to sell products in order to feed his family. And because he was being harassed by the police, he set himself on fire, and that's when the whole process of what is called the Arab Spring started, and then went all the way to Egypt and Bahrain, stopped in Bahrain with some situation that I do not go inside very much. But in Africa itself, in 2011 and 2014, there were two important events that happened. The 2015 event is a young generation of Africans from Burkina Faso who, 27 years after the assassination of Thomas Sankara, decided to remove the dictatorship that was in place, and that was led by the president, Blaise Compaoré, who was the main element in the murder of Sankara. When this process happened, most of these people who were engaged in this struggle, they were not born when Sankara was in power. In 2011 also, a process in Senegal took place, even though the process was just to challenge the president at the time not to go into an attempt to have a third term in office. It started a kind of popular revolt that stopped that process. Now that itself are just two examples of what's happening. And I would like to share with you two images of 1 or 2 minutes, not longer than that, to show what those events were, and you will see the similarities when we watch the movie in Burkina Faso. The most recent process of mass mobilization that is happening in Africa right now is happening against what is called the CFA currency. Most of the French colonial countries, ex-former colonies, are sharing right now the same currency called CFA, Colonie Française d'Afrique. That's what it was called before. After independence, they changed the name and call it Communauté Française d'Afrique. But the currency, the money is still the same. It's being controlled by France. It's being printed by France. And at the federal bank, France still have veto power in that institution in order to make sure that the interests of France are guaranteed. So the recent wave of protests across West Africa is happening around the struggle to dismantle the CFA front in order to push forward for a common currency within all the West African region. I don't want to go too long because we have a movie to watch, but I would want to like just to finish by showing you just those images so that you can keep in mind when you watch the movie on Burkina Faso to see the events that took place in Burkina Faso, in Senegal in 2011, the current mobilization process that's taking place against the CFA, and this event took place just last month in Paris, and you will see the mass mobilization of young generation of Africans who are trying to challenge the status quo, and that will be enough to convince us that history is always on the move, even though sometimes we have the impression that things are stagnant. Now, the reason I mentioned earlier is that this event today was the connection between the struggle in Africa, in the Caribbean, because if you know, I'm sure you know already that a similar process took place in Grenada around the 79 AD, and then unfortunately the same experience also was crushed in a very bloody coup, and you have the similarity of those two situations. I would like to invite people who've been supporting this initiative to come read some quick, short solidarity messages, because the struggle, as Sankara used to say, is one. Even though we have some specific conditions we are fighting against, specifically in Africa, in the black world, we understand also that the forces of oppression are similar in the way they operate outside Africa. So because of that, we would like to call John and his partner to come read quickly a short message of solidarity. John has been one of the first one who wrote a book on Thomas Sankara back in 1987, and he's been also an organizer who helped put this event together. So you guys can come. After John, I will call on Claire to come read also a very quick message from a group called Socialist Action, which wanted to send also their greetings and their solidarity messages. So just after.
My name is John Riddell. I am very proud to be at this event and to meet you and to see this film on how Sankara lives on in Burkina Faso today. 30 years ago, I was working with a socialist publishing house called Pathfinder in New York, and I was part of the team that initially translated Sankara's speeches and writings into English and got them put together in a book. Eventually I returned to Toronto, but the team at Pathfinder continued their work and have now put out a second edition of what's called Sankara Speaks, and the Pathfinder friends were very gracious to bring them down to the books to the bookshelf here tonight, so they're available for sale. And there's also a little biography of Sankara by Ernest Harsh, who knew him at the time. I brought that along. Now, that made me think about the fact that it's not a lot of people know about Tonga Sankara who have never seen his words, have never heard his words. In French, yes, they're available widely, but not in English. Through this book, yes, but if you go to the public library, they will not loan you this book because they don't have it available for loan. And if you go to the University of Toronto Library, they have one copy available for loan, but you have to pay hundreds of dollars to get a library card in order to borrow it. And you do not find the works of Thomas Sankara, to my knowledge, available on the internet. So we have a problem here of making his words and ideas more available. So I'm interested in doing something about this, and anyone else here who has any ideas or would like to talk about it, please speak to me after. And I will now let my partner, Suzanne Weiss, finish the greetings.
My name is Suzanne Weiss. I just want to tell you this is a fantastic book, and you should try and get a hold of it somehow. Of course, 2 copies are here. There's another little book that is available, and this can be gotten through the library, I believe. And I just want to say that I was deeply inspired by reading Thomas Sankara's words, and particularly his writings on women. He speaks of women's suffering with unique empathy. and insight. He describes the brutal conditions of which everyone was aware of, that is, the brutal conditions under which they lived and probably still live today. And of course, no one spoke of those brutal conditions, but he wrote about them. And he calls on the men as part of the revolution to change their conduct and towards the women. And he appeals to the women to spearhead the social liberation of everyone. And Sankara's message of liberation is needed here in Canada just as much as in Africa. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words to you.
Okay, dear sisters and brothers, comrades, please convey the greetings of Socialist Action, Ligue pour l'Action Socialiste, to the October 14th gathering in Toronto to celebrate the life of Thomas Sankara on the weekend of his brutal assassination 30 years ago. Widely regarded as Africa's Che Guevara, Sankara was a great opponent of imperialism and a remarkable fighter for the independence of his land, renamed Burkina Faso after he became its president. Under his leadership, distribution of land to impoverished peasants, nationalization of sectors of the economy, renunciation of usurious debts to wealthy foreigners and institutions like the IMF, amazing efforts to ensure the provision of water, food to the majority, literacy, women's rights, and much more show the way forward for human emancipation across Africa and globally. The experience of the Sankara-led revolution demonstrates that solidarity with freedom struggles is essential, but only a socialist revolution that knows no boundaries is the path to genuine democracy, economic development in harmony with nature, and liberation from all forms of oppression. That is what Thomas Sankara envisioned. It is why we denounce all who are complicit in his assassination and why we celebrate his life. Revolutionary greetings, Barry Weissleder, Federal Secretary, Socialist Action, Ligue pour l'Action Socialiste.
Thank you. We didn't go today in depth on the actions of Thomas Sankara because we wanted just to focus a little bit on the movie and also on the exchanges we might have after. But for those who are not very familiar with his work, as a leader of the Burkina Faso revolution, Sankara was, the main program of the revolution was based on African self-reliance, with the goal of eliminating corruption and the dominance of former French colonial power that was holding the country even after former independence. Immediately after the revolution took place in 1984, one of the most ambitious programs for social and economic change ever attempted in the African continent took place. Some of the few achievements during those 4 years period was that a total of 2.5 million children were vaccinated against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles in a matter of weeks. A nationwide literacy campaign pushed the illiteracy rate from 13%, the literacy rate from 13% to 73% in 1987. Over 10 million trees were planted across the country to fight against desertification. Roads, railways, bridges were built thanks to the mobilization of the population of Burkina Faso. Appointment of female in high governmental positions were also made. All salaries from the public sectors, including his own, were reduced in order to finance the major projects of social transformation across the country. The production of agriculture also made some great progress in the span of 4 years. So, as we can see, within the 4 years of presence within the government in Burkina Faso, the revolutionary process managed to push the country further ahead than what the country has gone through from 1960 to 1984. And that is due to two elements. One, the mobilization of the revolutionary process, but more importantly, the vision that was driving that, and the success in embarking the rest of the population into that process of transformation. Today, 30 years after the process, we always thought inside guerrilla that the struggle has two components. One component is the judicial system, the judicial process, which we hope will create the condition for us to identify people who are behind the assassination of Thomas Sankara and his comrade. That's one aspect. As we speak, last year, as we saw at the end of the movie, the body of the Sankara and his comrade was exhumed. DNA testing was done in two different laboratories, first in France and second in Spain, but unfortunately, those results were negative, and none of the 12 bodies that were recovered from the cemetery were identified and linked to their families. But that shouldn't stop us to continue to seek the process for a trial, because we know that Blaise Compaoré, who was in power, who is now living in neighboring country in Ivory Coast, was an element of a coup that was larger than him. We suspect that French was at the heart of this overthrow of the government of Burkina Faso. We made a lot of requests to the National Assembly of France to have access to the file of the government, and we will always be rejected. And then we believe that if we had access to those files, we will have a clear picture of what happened around that assassination. But today, that process is continuing. We have a collective of 18 lawyers, including some here in Canada, in France, and in Burkina Faso, who are leading the case, and we hope that within 1 year we're going to have a beginning of a trial with the presence or the absence of Blaise Compaoré in the country. The second aspect of this struggle was a political struggle, because 27 years, 30 years after, we have made some gains, and those gains is that today the memory of Thomas Sankara is still alive, and that was one of our objectives initially when we launched this campaign against impunity in Africa, to try to bring those responsible in justice. It was to make sure that the experience and the legacy of Thomas Sankara will live on, and that will continue to inspire people in Africa, in the Caribbean, and across the world as a model of integrity, as a model of change, as a model of progressive change, more importantly. Today, the challenges are numerous. We have the question of resource grab happening across the continent. We have multinational corporations moving in, having access almost freely to national resources, whether it is gold, whether it is land for agriculture, whether it is coltan that we use in cell phones in order to, and in telecommunication industries. Those multinational corporations are pillaging the continent with the complicity of the local president and local leadership that are in place. That's why we believe that not only we have to wage this struggle inside our own country to remove those in charge, but also the problem is much larger, because it's an international problem with multinational forces that are very strong and very powerful who are behind these processes. I can just go quickly on one simple example, what is called the EPA, the Economic Partnership Accord, which is a set of accords that the European Union is pushing to have African countries sign, and also Caribbean countries sign. And what that accord will mean for those countries is that going forward, once they sign it, those borders within those countries will be open for multinational corporations from Europe to export their product in the Caribbean and in Africa. Everybody knows that when that happens, because of the weakness of the economies of these countries, it's going to be a major challenge, and then the embryo of industries, even that exist today, might be destroyed, because there is no possibility for these economies to compete on an equal footing with the multinational corporation operating from Europe. Another example that I can give very quickly is tourism and the cruise industry. Everybody knows that in the Caribbean, tourism is a very big element in the economy, same as a lot of African countries, but the cruise industry is organized in such a way that very little is going to the local population in the Caribbean. everything is organized in a way that people, when they go inside those cruises, they have a card that they can tap in to consume inside the cruise until they return back. Even if they make some stop in some Caribbean countries, it's for 24 hours and then they're going to come back, and they're not even allowed to carry a large amount of currency with them. This is organized in such a way that most of the expenses that will be done by these people who are going to be on vacation will be spent inside the ship, so that the Caribbean countries, little they used to have on those cruises, well, they will not have it. The last point I would like to make very quickly is the question, the security question in West Africa, in Africa in general. We always see that there is a manipulation of the public opinion in terms of trying to sell this idea of the fight against so-called jihadist movement, etc. While the same forces that are behind these groups are the ones who are and manipulating them, keeping them on the leash sometimes and letting them loose, and then sometimes keeping them back, and create some type of chaos, and in that chaos they can come in and then steal and then pillage the continent with the complicity of some local leadership. So we have to denounce those elements, and then what I will finish is that based on all those challenges that we see today, 30 years after the assassination of Sankara, what should be our stand as people who would like to make a change on those conditions? We understand that the struggle is similar, is unique, is the same in the Caribbean and in Africa. Black people, African people across the world are still facing the same condition of humiliation, of exploitation, marginalization. Inside our countries, we don't have control of our economies. We don't have the possibility even to decide which direction we would like to take. Because every time there's an attempt to move in that direction, we see what happened in Grenada in '79, we see what happened in Burkina Faso in '87. That's why we came to the conclusion that the only way forward, personally, I believe so, is to move to a bigger space. Because the countries are so small, so weakened, taken individually, that they cannot sustain resistance against the forces that are trying to disrupt them. So one of the approaches that we advocate is going back to revisit the concept of federal state, whether it is in the Caribbean, whether it is in Africa, to move through a political federation that will have the possibility to have a common army that will create the condition for security, collective security of our population, instead of relying on the United Nations or the US or the Europe or France. Second, to have a single voice on the international scene when we negotiate an institution like the WTO or any other organization, because as a small country like Burkina Faso with a population of 5 million, 10 million people, very weak economically, that country will not have the power to go and negotiate at the equal footing on the WTO or at the United Nations or anything. The other example is the question of diplomacy. It is important that African countries and Caribbean countries move in bloc when they have to negotiate with big economic blocs, like whether it is the European Union, whether it is China or India. As long as countries keep going on the individual basis, one by one, it's going to be very difficult for them to put their interests on the table. And that's why we believe the federal question should be key, and we should be organizing to move forward what used to be the original project of the Pan-Africanism that was initiated by Marcus Garvey centuries ago, to move back to the path of reconnecting the struggle. Getting closer, because the conditions are similar. Doesn't mean that we're all the same, we have the same everything, but the condition we are living today is the same, and that should push us to go in the same direction and then strengthen ourselves to move as a group, as a bloc, in solidarity with other groups around the world who are fighting for similar things. If it is similar. I would just like to stop there, because I just want to introduce the discussion and then hear about everyone what they think is the urgency today, where we should be putting the focus in our struggle, what should be the approach, what should be the strategic objective we should be targeting, so that from here we can at least have some idea or some vision of when we should be moving 30 years after the assassination of Thomas Sankara. Thank you.